we'll be ready to go. We're going to welcome Rachel Gibson from the League of Women Voters of Nebraska. She is the vice president, and she is responsible for about, I think, 7 or 8 action teams that deal with the legislature, and I'm surprised she's not at hearings, or she probably is, watching them all this morning. And the hearings this morning actually are on immigration. And you might remember that we've had 2 programs on immigration. So those are things that you might want to see what's happening as far as the results of the hearings today. See how many and which and how many of those immigration bills we get out of. One of the things that we are asked to remind you each time we have a meeting is that the League of Women Voters of Nebraska is a nonpartisan grassroots civic organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Membership in the League is open to people 16 years and older of all gender identities. With 100 years of experience, the League is one of the oldest and most trusted civic nonprofit organizations in the United States. The League of Women Voters of the United States is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. Good morning. Are you ready to go, Rachel Gibson? I'm talking to you, but you can't hear me?
She's muted. I can see the microphone.
You're muted.
I can hear you just fine.
And you're not down at the legislature with all these bills that are going on in the hearings this morning? No? All right, you're on. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm here.
So go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm able to see my slides, and if not, that's totally fine. I can pull up my own to kind of take a look at them. Let's see. Right, well, hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Gibson, Vice President of Action for the League of Women Voters of Nebraska, and I am delighted to chat with you all today. I know we've got some probably action team members there, so hello to everyone. I would just like to touch on some of the topics that are being covered this year in our legislature. And so I've got a couple slides that are sharing some of the themes we're seeing in some individual bills. I'm not going to talk about each individual bill, but I will share these slides in case you want to dig in more. This is more about just kind of the themes we're seeing, and now that we're getting to the end of hearings, what we really think is going to be, moving forward. So, if you've got my slides there, you can go to the second slide, which is the League of Women Voters. You all know what this is because you are, but I just always share this with whoever I present with, and I really emphasize the fact that we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit grassroots organization. So nonpartisan, meaning we don't support parties or people, but we do support policies. That's important, and we advocate pretty ferociously on some, but not parties and candidates. Nonprofit meaning, in our case, we have no paid employees across the state, so this is all just people who really care. And then grassroots, really we really focus on local issues. So, as you all know, a lot of what we do is the voter services side of things. So that is registering voters, vote for one, forums, things like that. But we have the other side that people don't always know about, which is where I live, which is in the legislative advocacy. So this is looking at just our state level government, and I have an incredible group of volunteers that I get to work with. We have 6 different action teams, so folks can kind of self-select into the issue area of their choice. And what we do is we basically look at all of the state level legislation that comes out. These groups, look at the bills that are relevant to their areas, and then kind of highlight, hey, these are the things that we're seeing that we are concerned about or we want to support, and then we take action on those, whether that's writing a position statement, or I'm sure all of you get my action alerts, unless you unsubscribed, which no harm, no foul, because it's a lot. So that's where, how do we pick which bills it comes out of this. So, again, I know that a lot of you know that, but just wanted to kind of share how we talk about it with other folks as well. All right, to jump right in there. And Chris, if there's a question or a hand, interrupt me, drop it in the chat. I want this to be useful for you all, so if we go down a rabbit hole, I'm fine with that. All right, so as we jump in here, I've got these topics, but to set some context of where we're at in this session, we are just past the halfway point in our second short session. So we legislate in 2-year chunks. So our first year, the long session was last year, and that is the long session because that's when they set the budget, and they set a 2-year budget. So usually we get into the second year, the year we're in now, and it's the short session, and it's short because we've already set the budget, so we don't need to spend the time on that. This year is different because we have some very large budget issues, and so we're trying to cram all that in a space that's shorter than normal. So we are about halfway through that second session, and what that means is we are wrapping up hearings today. This is the last day for public hearings, so all the bills that have been introduced have been introduced, they've had their hearings. We are now just working with that bucket of bills moving forward for the rest of the session. Now what that means we transition into is full day legislative debate, and also, again, budget's going to take a big amount of time, and that should be happening in the next few weeks. So with all that said, of the bills that we saw about 500 to 600 pieces of legislation introduced this year, and that's on top of the ones that got carried over from last year. So we've got a lot of legislation we're looking at, and these are some of the themes that kind of rose to the top. The first one I want to highlight is immigration. And I have 2 slides on this because we have so many. So the first kind of type of immigration bill that we're seeing is about longer term issues, like seeing how things are working right now and saying, okay, how do we mitigate issues in the future? These are both in situations that are very supportive of immigrants and undocumented folks, and also really trying to address that in a potentially negative way, depending on how you're looking at it. So one of the big ones I will highlight is LR 283CA from Senator DeKay. And I think this is just a good one to highlight because it puts in context how we're having this conversation. And this is a constitutional amendment, so that means it would change the state constitution. If it passes the legislature, we get to vote on it. So it's a 2-step process, because only we can change our constitution, not the legislature. And what this does is it changes one word in our constitution from every citizen to only citizens may vote. Now, the reason this is indicative of kind of the feel of this session is that change actually doesn't do anything. We already have in the rest of our Constitution and in other places and in our statute that non-citizens can't vote. There's already structures in place. The change of that word is more of a signaling issue, and also from a voter advocacy standpoint, not only am I concerned about what we're broadcasting to all of our Nebraska neighbors, whether documented or undocumented, we're also removing the word every. And that feels like in the future, we could point back and say, well, we never said everyone can vote. This group shouldn't be able to vote. So if you think about like restoring voting rights for felons or, other populations, that causes me pause, because not only are we doing nothing to signal a political feeling, and also we're laying the groundwork for potential problems down the line. So I raised that one because I think that sets the context, is that a fair amount of the policy this year is less about the policy and more about what it represents. And also because this bill has been prioritized by this Senator DeKay, which means that it is kind of bumped to the top of the line of bills that we will hear. We have a finite amount of time, and so we will not be hearing all of those pieces of legislation. It will completely depend on what the speaker chooses to schedule and when. By having a priority, he's already said those will get bumped to the top of the line, and we may not even hear all of the priority bills because we don't have time. So, there's support for that one. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. You will definitely be getting extra words from me on that one, but I really wanted to highlight that. The others that I've listed there are both predominantly trying to protect folks who are in our immigration and our undocumented population in addition to our state. So, for example, Senator Greca has a guest worker permit program, which this would really impact some folks from Lexington with the closure of the Tyson plant, to basically say, you can still work and that's okay, you won't be in violation of federal law, but we know that you're going to have to move to a different place. So we've got things like that. We also have some different pieces about like law enforcement and whether the state can partner with law enforcement. The big focus of that is most of the bills are trying to ensure that the legislature is part of that conversation, because as you all probably know, with the opening of the McCook Detention Center, that was completely done by our executive branch without consultation to our legislative branch. And our legislative branch is actually the one who makes policy and manages the money. So they really should be part of that conversation. So that's a few of the other ones. The one other one I'll highlight, I don't know if this one's going to go anywhere, but LB 886 from Senator Anderson, that second one. This would basically, as soon as it signs into law, make invalid anyone's driver's license for people who are not citizens of the U.S. So previously, or if they have from other states some sort of valid form of driver's license that is currently legal, it would make it illegal. And therefore, if individuals get pulled over, that's a heightened level of violation that could really open the door to some much more risky things that could happen to folks. And additionally, it affects whether folks can get insurance, car insurance, which then impacts everybody. And then finally, you just think about what that means for how are people supposed to get to work or take their kids to school. And, this is a meaningful portion of not only our communities, but our economy. And that would make it harder for them to work. So those are kind of the big structural ones. I'll have you go to the next slide, which is more about protecting what's happening right now and what we've seen nationally, and trying to think ahead of time and say what can we put in place to keep folks safe. And these bills are all but one, all but the last one are being heard today in the Judiciary Committee. So if you're interested, you can live stream that hearing and hear how that goes. I will also say, because they have gotten scheduled as literally the last bills of session, I would be shocked if any of these move forward, just from a timing standpoint. So basically, the themes of these are either, banning masks or facial coverings and requiring identification of law enforcement officers, including ICE. There are a couple for those, and then there's the other two are about safe spaces, so identifying places which ICE cannot, work without, in one case, without a warrant. So Senator Dungan's there at the bottom. It says just schools. You can't go into a school without a warrant. If you have a legitimate warrant, you can go into the school if you need to. But that is providing some clarity about, who can access our schools, and gives our administrators and our teachers clarity about legally what they are responsible for. The other one, which is Senator Juarez's, is broadly reaching. It includes hospitals, clinics, schools, crisis rape centers, homeless shelters, any sort of sensitive places would prohibit ICE from working there. I do not think that one will move, but does have a hearing today. So those are kind of broadly the immigration type bills that are on the docket. I'll pause real quick and see if there are any questions. Either Chris, you can throw them in the chat, or if somebody in the room has one. I'll drink some water while you do that. All right, I'll just keep rolling. I really hope you can actually hear me and I'm not just giving a lecture to my dogs. All right. Housing, but you can't hear me, good. They've heard it already. They're pretty well informed. They're civically engaged. Can't vote, but they're civically engaged. Okay, housing. So that next slide, if you're following along. Housing is a really tricky issue this session. We've had some really incredible bipartisan hard work, communicating with advocates and law enforcement and all sorts of things to come together a few years ago to pass some really significant funding for affordable housing, particularly middle-income housing and workforce housing. We got some new funds up and running, there were grants going out. In the past 3-4 years, that money has been clawed back. And so some of the bills received for housing are either trying to reinstate that funding, or trying to put some guardrails around it so it can't get taken, or even put more money, or, can we change how the system runs so it's easier to get money out the door? But some of them are trying to correct that issue. Some of the other ones are about unhoused folks and access to housing and tenants' rights. So the two that I really want to highlight is this first one from Senator Dover, 809. This would prohibit political subdivisions from enacting certain ordinances related to landlords. Okay, what that means is that the context for this is that the city of Lincoln last year ran a successful ballot initiative that put it in statute that in state or city charter that landlords could not discriminate based on what type of income was coming in. As long as it's lawful income, that needs to be considered. So when you think about if you rent or know someone who does, you usually have to say, what's your monthly, so they can assess whether this is, financially okay for them, which totally fair from the landlord standpoint. What it's saying is landlords can't say, we don't count Section 8 as income, or we don't count alimony or child support, veterans benefits, anything. They can pick and choose what they're going to identify as legitimate income, even if it's legal income otherwise. So Lincoln put that in place and said you can't do that. And so this bill from Dover is coming in and saying, yeah, actually you can, instituting statewide that you can discriminate based on income, and that would also invalidate Lincoln's and sets the precedent that no city or town could opt to put that protection in again. So that is what Senator Dover's bill does, is not only change the rules, but also say that local entities can't manage their own stuff. And yet another example of just kind of this disregard for the public in the process, the fact that Lincoln went through this ballot initiative and very clearly voted in support, and immediately the legislature is bringing back something to undercut it. It's just become a really bad theme that we're seeing. The next one on here that I want to highlight is Anderson's LB 925, which the league got name checked in this one, so that was fun. This is from Senator Anderson, and it is titled the State Parks and Public Places Act, Safe Parks, which sounds very nice. What this bill actually does is it makes camping, which would be, homeless encampments or being unhoused on the streets, illegal. And it would, across the state, it would also prohibit local entities, so like Hastings couldn't say, we're okay with it in this area or whatnot, it would just say you cannot do that. What's really incredible about this one is then it goes next level and says that if a entity doesn't enforce it, then they can be penalties to them. So if someone reported to the state government that, hey, there's someone on Hastings and the police aren't taking care of it, Hastings could have a penalty against them for not enforcing that rule that they're not allowed to change. So this one had broad opposition, including the League of Women Voters. And Senator Anderson wrapped up his hearing by saying, why in the world would the League of Women Voters support this? And shared some stats about violence against women that happens in homeless communities, which is very true and something we should pay attention to. But kind of missed the whole, but we have to help these communities and put our efforts there instead of criminalizing communities. So it was a very interesting hearing, and I would encourage folks to go back and listen. He also did not have nice things to say about our nonprofit housing folks, which was unfortunate because actually even the folks who testified in support, predominantly law enforcement, made a point to say that our nonprofit housing folks are great partners. So it's nice to hear that coming from the people who are actually on the front lines working on both sides of it. So that's broadly kind of what we're looking at with housing. All right, I could so get into the details, but I'm trying to keep myself focused. So I'll pause real quick. Any questions about any of the housing bills or anything? Cool. All right. Well, then I will move to our next one, which is voting and elections. This year when we started, we looked at the bills. I worked very closely with Gavin Geis of Common Cause, and he and I were both looking and we're like, okay, we're not seeing anything hugely attacking the voters. And then as session has progressed, we're like, oh, and yet you're finding a way. So a couple things I want to highlight here. One is a handful of bills that are very focused on elections themselves. So that first one you see, which is LB 884 for Senator Anderson, that has a lot of different pieces in it, and some of the pieces are fine. In fact, some of the pieces are good. That would actually help protect like election observers. Great, let's do that. The one piece in there that's not great is the very first part, which would require the state to utilize and be involved with the SAVE database. Now, to clarify, SAVE database, different than SAVE Act, which is what's being debated in Congress. Also bad, but two different things. So the SAVE database is really meant for immigration enforcement purposes, and we're concerned that ultimately will be used for SNAP or Medicaid, Medicare, and just general surveillance of our state population. So this would be putting in statute that we have to work with this system. I want to say that some of the provisions of this bill have been added to a different bill. I don't think the SAVE database is part of it. Doesn't mean we're out of the woods, can always get added, but there was some pretty legitimate pushback, and I think the committee was responsive to that. So that was one of Senator Anderson's bills. The other kind of theme that we're seeing is addressed at the ballot initiative process. So we have some folks in our legislature who do not don't think that the direct democracy ballot process should exist, very much feel that the people voted for them and the power is vested in them, and they are legislating accordingly. So a couple of those, it's interesting because we kind of knew this was coming because, as you all know, we've had a lot of ballot initiative related things, and the legislature changing, editing, amending, rolling back, whatever word you'd like to use, a lot of the things we've recently changed. So we anticipated something was coming. We thought it would be around maybe the percentage of votes needed to pass something for the ballot initiative of the people, or the number of counties, or something like that. They've instead gone the other way and are very focused on the ballot initiative committees, the funding for them, and the volunteers and paid signers that are collecting. So the big one here is, let's see, where did it go? I want to say it's storms. Yeah, 1068, which had some very specific things about who could collect signatures. The initial draft actually required signatures to wear photo identification. It had some restrictions around how many sheets you could turn into signatures. You had to register beforehand with the Secretary of State if you thought it was going to be above, I think, 25, which I'm sure some of you have collected signatures. If you have to use a different sheet per county, you can get to 25 pretty quick. And some other pieces like that that were really meant to restrict. Background checks was another one. Didn't clarify what type of background checks, just said generally background checks, didn't say who was paying for that. The hearing on that was very interesting. I think that the committee heard, we testified at that one, and I think that was good for them to hear from folks who had actually collected signatures before and talk about that experience. I think we might see elements of that included in something, but that bill as a whole probably won't go forward. The other one that they that has more legs, I think, and I think part of this is getting wrapped into another bill, is again from Senator Anderson, and the title is to change provisions relating to involvement of foreign nationals with funding and organization of ballot committee questions. If you've been following the news, you've probably seen that Attorney General Hilgers had raised concerns about a man who was born in Switzerland but now lives in Wyoming, who had donated money to national good government groups that then through grant processes filtered down, potentially, they're not even totally sure, but potentially filtered down to the ballot organizers in Nebraska. these were all only progressive ballot initiatives, and so it was things like raise the wage, paid sick leave, support our schools, medical marijuana. I want to say there's one more, fair housing. I think fair housing was the other one. So that has now been made a focus. What Senator Anderson's bill does is basically say no nonprofit can accept money in any way that may have, even before the person who gave it to you came from an international source, and that there's reporting requirements to that, to the effect. What was interesting in that hearing is that they asked about what about businesses, and the majority of the committee very much said, no, international businesses are fine, just nonprofits. So that disconnect was interesting. The other thing I'll note about that hearing is, as I mentioned, I was there, and the first 3 or 4 testifiers who were in support of the bill were all from out-of-state, which felt ironic to me. We were talking about, out-of-state influence, out-of-country influence, and they were very proud to say that they accepted no international money, which I was curious about. So we did a little digging, and they get their money from dark money sources, so we don't know where they get their money from. So they can say they didn't get it internationally because they don't know where it came from. So that was an interesting conversation, but it was very clear that the effort is to make it harder for ballot initiatives to run in the state. And like I said, I think there's elements of that one that may get put in, but we'll have to wait and see. Okay, pausing on, and if you're thinking, I'll give you a minute to think of questions, and just highlight this one because I like it. LB 1066 from Senator Frederickson. He's actually my senator, District 20. This would require members of the legislature to complete a civics assessment within a certain amount of time of them being sworn in. The questions would be the same questions used in the naturalization test. It's not if you pass, you're not a senator. It is just we want to see where you're at, and if you don't do great, you have the opportunity to take a course to better understand how the government works. There's also a transparency piece, and that all of their scores would be put on their senator homepage. So what's really interesting about that is his co-sponsor is a much more conservative individual, and they both said, yeah, we should know how our government runs. So that's an interesting one. Any questions on the voting or elections ones? Okay. We got 2 more time. Oh, go ahead.
You're good. We're just gonna take that view just in case there is some conversation. So
Great.
sorry, this is really we're
As long as people can hear, and yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I've got two more kind of topic areas. I'm going to just briefly want to touch on the budget. So the next slide, you'll see there's a trio of anti-trans bills that are up this year. This is Senator Kauth, this has been her issue since she started in the legislature, Millard area senator. The first one, if you recall, at one point she brought a Sports and Spaces Act, which was doing 2 things: prohibiting folks from playing on sports teams, kids playing on sports teams that didn't align with their gender assigned at birth, and then also restricting access to locker rooms, bathrooms, facilities, again by the same metric. That passed, but only the first part last year. The spaces part got pulled out. So what 730 is it's the spaces part of that. So she's bringing it back again. Even though we already had this conversation, same group of senators. So this would, put some restrictions there. I also I feel like this is another one where it's kind of lost. I really encourage everyone to read the language of that bill, because in addition to those restrictions, which the league opposes, there's some really concerning language about it being appropriate to have different spaces for men and women. And the way it's written even includes like social spaces, things like that. It's very concerning. So I encourage people to look at that. The second one that she's brought, LB 731, is very much directed at physicians, and basically puts gender-affirming care in a different category that requires additional malpractice insurance, lengthens times that doctors can be taken to court, increases the costs to all of that. So It's very directed at physicians, and the medical community has actually looked at this and said, this is concerning, again, A, because, yeah, no, this is bad, but also too, because the breadth of that, I mean, therapy is considered part of gender-affirming care, so that is concerning that that's getting put in statute. Additionally, once you start making different rules for different types of care, again, if it's in statute and we're with it once, then what's, there will be additional things that get brought. Of course, this might mean abortion care, but this could also mean like anti-obesity care. Again, if we're legislating based on moral belief, there are folks who believe that being overweight is a personal failure, and so why would they say that you can't sue or whatnot? So it's just good to think through the implications of all those things. And then the last one she's bringing is LB 732, which the very first bill she passed was about prohibiting access to gender-affirming care for minors, even with consent of their parents. That got whittled down so that it was only the highest level of care, and it kind of got rid of some of the others and said, okay, you can use puberty blockers or other interventions, just not surgical. This, again, is bringing the whole kit and caboodle and just saying, nope, any form of gender-affirming care is not allowed for minors, even with parental consent. So, anti-trans bills, they continue. She has prioritized 731. There's a back and forth about, I don't think her colleagues want to have this conversation yet again. Last vote count, she didn't have votes to get it passed, and the speaker has said, we have so limited time, I'm not bringing something unless it has the votes. With that said, we've seen her use many tools to get her bills to the floor, so I would be concerned about this one. Okay. Briefly talk about safety net programs, and then we'll touch on the budget. So the last kind of area we're seeing things in is in safety net programs, and a lot of this is coming out of, some people call them entitlement programs, but a lot of this is coming out of the HR 1 that was passed, the big beautiful bill that started pulling back on a lot of those. One of the things it did was it instituted work requirements for access to SNAP. And that had actually been brought previously at the state level, and every time the DHHS came in and they said, actually it would be more expensive for us to try to track this down than to just provide the benefits. So fiscally, it wasn't a wise decision. It has now been implemented nationally. Nebraska is the first one to fully implement it, so there are a couple bills to try to exempt certain populations. One is veterans. One is kids who are in foster care once they age out, if they have not returned home. Let's see, what are some of the other ones that they were, refugees? Kind of hard to work. So there's a couple different ways that they're trying to carve out folks who are the most in need and structurally unable to do some of the work requirements being requested. So there's a few of those. There's also some efforts to expand access and care. So let me see, Senator Frederickson's one in there. Yes, so Senator Frederickson's 929 would basically limit the amount that DHHS could require shared costs with individuals. So on Medicaid and Medicare, with our budget situation, they're looking anywhere they can find for money. So we are beyond, raising taxes or cutting programs. They're looking for all sorts of creative ways. One of what we're seeing is the shared cost with the individual and the government, increasing how much the individual pays to that. So there's still coverage for Medicaid and Medicare, but instead of a $20 copay, you have a $60 copay. So he's trying to limit how much that can be done to folks who are on those programs that they have paid into. Let's see, and I think those are kind of the big ones. Oh, the other one I wanted to highlight was 926 from Senator Anderson. He is a huge champion of trying to rein in SNAP benefits and the spending related to that. This particular bill, he's suggesting to cut down the amount of time for families who are needing temporary care to be able to access food benefits. So I want to say it's like 36 months to, it's significant. It's like half, I want to say. And it also changes the calculation of who counts as a dependent. It like lowers the age, so if you have like a 14-year-old, they're no longer considered a dependent for the calculation of SNAP. So there's a lot of things that he's doing to try to kind of rein that in. So those are some of the safety net programs. There's also a ton in the medical area that are super in the weeds that I don't totally understand, but that is also a conversation happening. All right, anything on any of those bills before we get to the big bad meat budget? All right, the budget. I have decided this year that I am going to understand it, and so I have studied and read and asked and learned. So you get to go on this journey with me. So the budget. The way our budget works broadly in Nebraska, again, we work in 2-year chunks. The beginning of that 2-year chunk, the governor comes out and says, here's how much we think we're going to be bringing in. Here's all the things I'd like to see done, things cut, things added, moved around. Here you go, legislature. Then the Appropriations Committee, which is 9 senators, looks at that budget, has a hearing on every single government agency that would impact. They come in, they talk, and then at the end of that, Appropriations releases their own budget, which is actually what they work off of to what we end up with. In the past, the budgets, the governor's budget and the Appropriations budget have been very similar. This year, we're seeing a wider discrepancy. And then once that gets moved out of the appropriations budget, it goes to the whole legislature to debate, and then they pass that, and then the governor does have the ability to line item veto. So that's what the process looks like. I want to reiterate that the power of the purse is with the legislature. They are truly the ones who are making the decisions about where our money goes, with the governor's input, but it is their responsibility. So, the governor's proposal. The context at the beginning of this year is that we had no money. We had negative money. We had, I want to say it was like negative 471 million, if I remember correctly. We could have a whole conversation about why that happened. SparkNote version is we've cut income taxes for the highest earners and corporations. In the past few years, we've also provided some business incentives that have kind of cleaned out the coffers, and we've had lower than projected, sales tax and things like that. We also have started really focusing on trying to get money to property tax relief, which I want to say, be very clear, is not levied by the state. The state does not set property taxes. It doesn't go to them. They are uninvolved, but in an effort to provide this relief, they have created these new buckets where our money is going, our tax money is going. So there's money going out in that way too. So all that is to say, that is where we started with no money. The governor, his initial budget was very interesting. He came out with a budget that not only brought us to zero, but actually put us significantly ahead in the next year, which I am not following the math on that one, but that was the projection. The main way that he's doing this is by cutting spending, and he's very clear that that is his goal. There were several significant cuts to programs. Disability resources was a huge one that there was a huge backlash to, and he kind of eased off a little bit. But I mean, just all over the board. It's environmental type things, police and firefighters. There's a huge range, and I'll show you in a second where those are. He also did a lot of shifting between types of funds. So, long story short, we have one big bucket of where most of the money goes that we can use for anything. That's where all our tax dollars go. And then we have smaller buckets that are dedicated to certain things. So think the DMV. You pay a fee when you go to the DMV for your driver's license. You're not paying into the big bucket, you're paying into the DMV bucket, and they're using that money to run, if that makes sense. So the governor basically looked at all these little buckets and said, that looks like a lot of money. I would like that, please, and put it in the big bucket to do what he would like with it. Part of the reason that he did that, again, is so that he could take that money out and put it in those property tax relief funds. If he had not moved the money, we have rules about how much you have to keep in the general fund, and we would not have met that ability for him to move things out. So that's why the money was getting moved. I'm so sorry I'm getting so in the weeds on this. What's actually crazy is this is actually pretty high level. It's so complicated. But long story short, He is continuing to do that, taking money from funds that they were not intended to. The biggest one you've probably heard about is the Environmental Trust Fund. His argument is that he's still using it for the purpose because marinas are in water, so if I'm going to build a recreational marina, I can use the Environmental Trust because that's about water. That's kind of the way he's thinking about this. He also, I really want to highlight this point, he is setting policy in his budget. In his proposed budget on section 9, and I would really encourage everyone to go read it, it explicitly says, none of the money appropriated by the 109th Legislature first or second session, so the money we already gave out, shall be used for the purpose of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And then he goes on to describe exactly what those are, even listing words that aren't allowed to be used in mission statements or purposes or programs or titles. It's things you would expect, like transgender, but it's also things like allyship or historically disadvantaged. So very concerned that we're putting statute, policy in the budget, which should just be a document about where the money goes. Now, the trick with that is, we'll see if the budget, the appropriations committee puts out, if that language is in there. Best case scenario, they just say, we're just going to do the budget part. But that's when we'll know if that's moving forward. To give you a sense of just a snapshot from the governor's perspective on that next slide, I have listed all the places, not all of them, this is the big ones, that he is decreasing funding for. And then I've listed, he is choosing to increase funding in certain areas, which I really want to highlight because if we are in such a budget crisis, we should not have money to put anywhere. So it's selective about where we're putting money. So you'll see his priorities there. And then, again, I just want to highlight the huge number in transfers that's happening and all those little places that they're taking money out of. And then finally, the last slide doesn't have a ton of information because Appropriations has only released their preliminary budget. I believe next week or the week after we'll have their full budget. But it did vary from the governor's. It still put us very much in the hole at $300 million. It did still significantly cut lots of programs, but it pulled back on some of those cuts. And it also pulled back on some of those transfers from different places. So the Appropriations Committee is even saying, like, bridge too far. So they're kind of pulling it back a little bit. Again, we will see what they bring out as their budget that goes to the floor and what that looks like. One extra little complicating wrinkle to this is that the Economic Forecast Board met this morning, and they actually revised down how much they think we're going to be bringing in. So we were in a hole, and then we got a little out of the hole, like we had a ladder, and then we kicked over the ladder and dug the hole deeper. So that's kind of where we're at, is that I want to say one of the projections I saw was $500 million, but I have not read the reporting on it yet, and I wasn't able to watch it. So we have a budget issue. There's some debate of whether it's a crisis or not. The governor is insistent that we do not have a budget crisis. But again, if we're needing to cut this much, it kind of begs the question if we do. I apologize if you can hear my crazy dogs. Apparently my mom's here. So, that is a ton of information I threw at you, and again, I will share these slides, and I'm always happy to answer questions or chat via email. If you like this type of stuff and you don't already, join us on Sunday nights. Every Sunday I have a session on Sessions at 7 because I love alliteration. And basically it's a Zoom where I kind of go through, like, here's what happened last week, here's what happened this week, here's some context. We often talk about the budget. This week we're going to talk about the Constitution, and just kind of keeps folks up to date on that. So if you're interested, it's open to anyone. You don't have to be a league member, but I will share the sign up and you can register and join us. So. Chris, I'll turn it back to you if there's questions or things folks want to talk about, and I will spare you my dogs while you do.
Also about an update on medical marijuana. Okay, Rachel, there is a question about an update on medical marijuana.
So the question is, what's the update on medical marijuana? Am I understanding correctly? Okay.
Yeah.
Medical marijuana is so deeply fraught. So the ballot initiative that passed needed the legislature to provide some frame.
Sure, you're good. That was just.
Okay. That's fine. So what the people passed required the legislature to put some guardrails around it. Not all ballot initiatives do that, and that's the one we said, would you please? And they didn't. So basically it vests the power for processes and approval in the commission, a commission that's appointed by the governor. The legislature tried to pass some rules that would put some guardrails around that they had to work within. They could not get that passed. So it basically got left to this governor-appointed commission to set the rules. He appointed two people who are very vocally anti-medical marijuana, or medical cannabis. They slow-walked it forever, got to the point that they had to institute some emergency rules which were crazy restrictive and people were afraid to follow. Since then, they've said they've been continuing to work on it and refine it, but we're still living under the emergency rules. And two of the people on that commission have now resigned. So the governor will be able to reappoint new people, but they can't do work in the interim. What has happened during session is that Senator John Kavanaugh, who's just been a huge advocate for medical cannabis, has introduced several different bills to try to get us moving somewhere. One of the bills was making that commission elected as opposed to appointed by the governor. Another one, what was the other one? That it was something about legislative oversight and giving the legislature more control to manage things. There was another bill about protecting doctors, because one of the biggest concerns here is that doctors don't have the clarity, or providers don't know what they can and can't do. And so they don't want to prescribe because, they could lose their license, and there's just no clarity about that. So right now where we're at is that we are down a few commissioners. The governor is going to be able to appoint that. There seems to be no appetite to move anything forward in the legislature, and the small group that is just getting shut down. And people still don't know how medical marijuana, if it's legal, and what they can use, how they can use it. So that is where we are at with medical marijuana. And of course, people in this room probably know way more than I do, so if other people have updates or insight, please share.
Any other questions?
I was just question about the real ID. About that. It's for women with a name, last name.
Question about a real idea, an IT initiative, like a hyphenated last name for women.
Yes, this is, I'm guessing again, this is kind of just the where are we at, as opposed to a very specific ask, which I hope it is, because I don't know the details as much. So there's a push to require documentation for voting. This has been happening for decades. As you know, Nebraska passed a voter ID law, voted the people, and then the legislature wrote legislation that would implement that. Honestly, considering the circumstances, best possible legislation we could have gotten. Was very broad, understood different circumstances, but we do have that voter ID. What's happening now is we're upping the ante. Things like the SAVE Act or other legislative tools at the state level is trying to say you need proof of citizenship to be able to vote. A photo ID, even if you had proof of citizenship to get that ID, does not count. You have to have proof of citizenship. So that's also, instead of calling it voter ID, it really is proof of citizenship voting. Now, that is complicated. If you are married and you've changed your name, you've been adopted, you can't have access to your birth certificate, all sorts of different things, because that would require you to bring those documents to prove that you can vote. So there is the real ID is a version of an ID that says, yes, we needed a constitutional document to get to this. And that is, some states have it, some states don't, but ultimately it is moving towards, and what the federal folks who are interested in this is, it is moving towards wanting you to show up with your birth certificate, your marriage license, whatever that proves that you've been here since the day you came out, and this is how your name changed since then. So that's Real ID is kind of I think was considered a solution, but is actually now kind of getting lost in the mess as they're moving towards even more restrictive.
Just one more thing, it looks like, if you comment on comments, would you write some comments on prohibiting weapons in the Capitol?
Oh boy, can I? Yes. Okay. It's so interesting. Okay, so currently in our legislature, you can bring guns. You can do whatever. If you've been down there, you can walk in. Oh, you can't bring signs. Signs are not acceptable, but guns are. So you can go into our Capitol. It's very accessible. The past few years, there's been actually several efforts to try to restrict folks from being able to bring guns into the Capitol. Those have always been brought by more progressive lawmakers, and they have never gone anywhere. This year, there have been some heightened incidents with, I believe some of the senators have received death threats, which again has happened in the past, but it's now the conservative senators, not just the progressives. And so they're feeling the pressure of wanting to create some safety around the Capitol. So the executive board, led by Senator Hansen, who is a conservative from Washington County, worked with the committee and said we need to ban guns from the Capitol and weapons and bombs, and institute some like metal detectors and things like that. Of course, the folks who are very pro-gun came in and said, we don't like that idea because we should get to hold our guns. So they have now, what they voted on a committee and is being debated on the floor of the legislature is like an amalgamation of both. So what most recently has passed to the second round of debate is that guns and weapons are prohibited unless you have either a concealed carry license or you are on the list that the state patrol keeps that says you can come in with a gun. And that is trying to, but the thing was brought of like, what about staff members or lobbyists or that sort of thing? People who are regularly there, they're known entities, but they may not have a concealed carry license because we don't require that anymore. So what we have now is two groups. One group that gets no guns, absolutely no guns, and one group that can have the guns. And yet they can all be in the Capitol together. So there's some clarity that's needed here. My understanding of this is there's some more talking. I think the struggle here is that because this has some elements of bipartisanship, and it's the farthest we've ever gotten about some form of Capitol security, that I think some of our more moderate and progressive legislators are saying, like, let's take whatever we can get. And some of our other legislators are saying, let's not institute a two-system access to the Capitol, both from a safety and from just a, like, who can talk to their senator level, and what makes it easy. So that's where they're at. They're on the second, that's up for the second round of debate. We will be hearing from that one again. I would encourage folks to read the actual language of the amendment. It's vague. So that's where we're at on the guns in the Capitol building. I've always asked if you can't have a sign, but you can have a gun. Can you have one of the guns that shoots out the little sign? Like, is that acceptable? So that's my suggestion.
On that note,
We have 2 more minutes. If anybody has another question, or Rachel, if you have anything else to add.
Is there anything about the passing
I'll let
third
people
grade?
think, and while they do, I just want to again highlight session on session. We'd love to see you. And also, if you want to get down to the Capitol, a really great day to do it would be March 23rd. We're doing this is the second to the People's Day, which this was in response to our legislators saying things like the voters didn't know what they voted on, so that we could go down and say, actually we did. So it's an open house style. We'll be there from 10 to 7 p.m. And folks can just come in whenever. We have a bunch of incredible nonprofit volunteers who basically get paired with anybody who shows up, and they say, what do you want to do? Do you want to talk to your senator? Do you want to watch a debate? Let me help you figure out how you want to make use of this day so that your senator can hear from you. So you don't have to register, but you can. I'll share that link. And I say, like, carpool. Have a carpool party from Hastings. That'd be awesome to see you there.
Okay, we do have another question.
About,
Correct.
can you pass third grade without being able to read?
Can you pass 3rd grade without being able to read?
As long as the information gets there and it's helpful, I don't really care. Whatever works. All right. Well, I hope we don't. Hopefully I'll see. I don't see some of you on Sunday. I hope I see more, and hopefully I'll get to see you in person by Capitol on the 23rd. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad it's useful to someone. All right. Have a good one.
Okay. Well, the only thing I regret is not inviting some of my friends. And be here.
Ramona's gonna be here at our next meeting. Are you gonna